Hello everyone. In this lesson we will take a look on how you can draw text on your screen and create different clickable buttons. So there are a few steps in order to draw any text on the screen. So first of all you have to create a font object, then you have to create a surface object using the font object from step 1, and finally you have to paste the surface object to the screen. So let's take a look at the details from these steps. So first of all, let's import our Pygame. Now we can do pygame.init to initialize Pygame. Then let's just copy the display width, display height, and the game surface from before. And let's also add our game loop. Oh, and we also need our colors here. So now in order to create a new font object, you could do font obj equals to pygame.font.font, and now you could say there is a pre-made font from the Pygame bundle, free sans bold.ttf. .ttf is a font file, and we can pick the size of the font here. Oops, I meant to say 12 here. So what you could also do here is you could just type none, and just Pygame would use the default font if you didn't want to choose anything different, but let's just choose this for now. And if you wanted to use a font from your computer system and not from Pygame, let's just create another font object. You could say pygame.font.sys font, which means system font. You could say something like Arial and free sans, and also the size 20, or you could just have this at you could say Arial here. And that means that this is going to try to pick the Arial font from your computer and not the pre-made bundle from the original fonts of the Pygame. So if you wanted to check all of the available fonts, you could just make a fonts variable, set this to pygame.font.getFonts. You could also do fonts.sort to sort all of the fonts. And then using a for loop for f in fonts, you could just print f. So if you run this, you're going to see all of the available fonts here that you could use from the Pygame library that is already provided. So now let's create a new surface object. So we can do that by just let me delete all of this font printing stuff. So now we can do text surface obj, and we can say font object dot render, and inside here we have to put some parameters. So first of all we have to put the text that we want to display on the screen. So for example, let's do hello world. Next we have to use a boolean, so a true or false value that is basically responsible for making the text look smoother or not so smooth. So I'm just going to set this to true, it doesn't really matter. And then we have to use a tuple for the color, so let's just do red right now. And lastly we have to use the background color, so we can leave this blank, we don't actually have to use a color for the background. So what this render function does is it takes our font and it writes this text with those parameters, and it makes it a text surface object. So let's just use font object 1 so we can make this Arial. But now we have to actually paste that text onto our game surface. So in order to do that, we will have to do game surface dot blit, and now we have to specify the object, so text surface object, and then we have to use the coordinates that we want to paste this on our surface object. So let's just use something like 10, 10. So this is here a tuple of the coordinates. And then we can use two more parameters called area and special flags, but we don't really need those. We won't be discussing them. So these are the three steps. Make the font object, and actually let's delete one of the font objects so you don't get confused. So create a font object, then create a text object using the font object, and then just paste it all to the game surface. Actually, if you want this to be more clear, I can put the game surface here at the top. So these here are the three steps: font, text object, and then pasting it to your game surface. So one more thing, let's just add a clock here. So clock equals pygame.time.clock. Remember, we used the clock last time. So now instead of actually pasting it here, we are just going to create it over here, and inside of our game loop we are going to be just putting it on the screen. And don't forget to add the clock.tick60 to control the frames, and that's it. So you could just put this outside of the game loop, but that means that you couldn't just erase it afterwards. So now if you go ahead and run this, you can see that it displays our text in the location that we requested. So now what I want to do is I want to create a new function that displays the text and just takes all of the parameters and does this on its own. So let's just define the display text method, and this can have a text, a style, a size, a color, and then the XY tuple in order to know where to display it. So in here we want to create a font object. Let's just delete all of the previous stuff over here. We want to create the font object. We can make this pygame.font.sysfont, and this here can have the style and the size that we requested here as parameters. And then let's create the text surface object, text surface obj, and this can have the font object dot render, and in here we could put text and true and also color. So this just gets all of the parameters from the function here. And lastly, we could do game surface dot blit, and let's just paste here the text surface object with the XY coordinates. So we could use here the function, so just display text, and in here we have to put, as you can see, the text. So first of all, let's just do welcome. Then we have to put the style, which is basically the font. Let's just do Arial. Then we have the size, let's do 20. The color, we can do green this time. And the XY values, let's just do 20 and 20. So this just takes all of these three steps in order to paste the font, to paste the text on the screen, and just puts them inside of a method to be able to use it more easily. So if we run this, as you can see, it works just like before without having to actually paste those three commands over and over again. So as exercises, what you can do is modify the code to display 4 different messages in different locations using different sizes and colors. Pretty straightforward, and try positioning the text in the center of the screen. So this is an exercise you could do to get better at writing the text on the screen. So now let's say you wanted to be better at positioning the text. So sometimes it's not so easy to estimate what the coordinates will be if you want to position it, for example, in the center. So we can get some help to position our text by using a rect object. So let me show you what you can do here. So what you could do is in here you could create a rect object and set this equal to text surface object dot get rect. So the get rect method just returns back a rectangular object to use for storing different coordinates. So this here takes 4 different coordinates, because remember it's a rectangle. So you could do rect object dot top left, top right, and then you could do bottom left and bottom right. And actually you could use more of these to make it more specific. You could use mid top, mid left, mid right, and mid bottom, and I think you could also use, yes, you could also use center. And you could also use top and left and right and bottom. So you could use all of these to actually determine what kind of rectangle you have. So in order to have a picture, this is kind of what I'm talking about. So these are all of the different points you could set. So this is top left, then top right, bottom left. And you could also use top, left, bottom, and right. And you could do something more inside here, like mid top, mid left, mid bottom, mid right. And you could even set the center. So you could set all of these values to whatever you want. You could change some or don't change them. It's up to you. But there are many ways to actually define this rectangular object. So by default, the top left part of the rectangular object is 0, 0. So it's the top left part of our screen. So if we just went ahead and did not specify anything here, and we could also remove the XY parameter from here, we could just use the rect object here instead of the XY coordinates, and this would print everything to the top left. So let's also remove this from here, and if I go ahead and run this, you can see this is at the very top left of our screen. So for example, now what we could do in order to change where this could be printed, we could go ahead and add here an attribute which is by default top left. And what we could also do is add the coordinate, which will be a tuple, and by default it would be 0, 0. Let me just put the color back here. So we're just adding attribute which is by default top left, and we are also adding the coordinates which are by default 0, 0. So let's go ahead and see how you could use that. Okay, so we could go over here and just make if attribute equals top left. So that means that we want our rect object dot top left to be equal to the coordinate. So I will just do this for every possible attribute we could use, and I will be right back. So what I have done over here is for every single possible attribute of the rectangular object coordinates, I am setting the coordinates passed from the arguments over here equal to the individual attribute. So whatever you choose can be assigned to the coordinates you choose. And if none of these are true, I'm just having this fallback to set the top left equal to 0, 0. So right after we do all of this stuff, we are just assigning this to the game surface. So now that we're done with this, let's go ahead and create a mid x, which will be equal to display width divided by 2. And these two slashes just mean that the result is going to be rounded up to the nearest integer, because pixels are integers and we can't have like 5.2 pixels. And then we have mid y, which is equal to display height, again divided by 2. So in here, let's go and display text. And now what we can use as parameters is welcome to my game, for example. We could make this Arial. We could make this like something like 40. This could be red. For the attribute, let's just say center, to put this in the center. And then we have to use the coordinates, which will be the mid x and mid y as a tuple. So let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. So as you can see, we have this text that is here on the middle. Now if we used, instead of center here, if we use top left, that would just put our text. We also have to use here 0 and 0 if we want to put this on the top left. But as you can see, you can customize it however you like, and it's much easier to set the correct coordinates, and you don't have to actually do trial and error with different numbers and see what works best. You can just use this way, and it's much easier and less time consuming. So as an exercise, what you can do is play around with rect attributes and try positioning the text like the image below. So just try to make this mid-top, mid-right, mid-bottom and mid-left kind of looking text here. So just play around with the different values and attributes and try to create this exact looking text on the screen. So that's it. Try to practice with different positioning, colors, fonts with the text, and try to be comfortable using it on your everyday games, because text writing on screen is really important when you're creating a game, and you should be comfortable doing this in not much time.